The relentless drizzle was more of a misty, chilling oppression than a proper rain, clinging to the heavy wool of Arthur Finch's suit jacket and soaking into the cracked leather of his satchel. Arthur, a meticulous 30-year-old insurance investigator from Richmond, felt the isolation of Blackwood Hollow immediately. It was a place where progress had apparently stalled decades ago, a cluster of worn timber homes and muddy tracks, overshadowed by the forbidding presence of the old stone church, the Blue Ridge Community Chapel. Arthur was not here for an insurance claim. He was here for a professional courtesy, a favor called in by his firm's founder, who had a personal connection to the recent tragedy. Reverend Silas Thorne had died 3 weeks ago. Officially, it was ruled a tragic accident, a fall from the steep, uneven steps leading down to the church's small, seldom-used basement. The Reverend had been found at dawn by the groundskeeper, his neck broken, a simple, horrific conclusion. But the founder's letter, now damp and crinkled in Arthur's pocket, had a pointed postscript. "Look closer, Arthur. Silas was a pillar. The whole affair smells of unnatural distress. Speak to the widow, Mrs. Evelyn Thorne. She is the only one who knows the truth of that old place." The streetlights, few and far between, cast a sickly yellow glow that seemed to fight the perpetual gloom. Arthur found the parsonage, a large, austere house adjacent to the chapel, with paint peeling like sun-blistered skin. He knocked, the sound echoing hollowly in the late afternoon silence. The door was opened by Mrs. Thorne herself. Evelyn Thorne, perhaps 35, was a striking figure, not in the way of metropolitan glamour, but with a severe, almost regal bearing that belied the circumstances. She wore a high-collared black dress, the fabric heavy and lightless. Her most arresting feature was her eyes, large, grey, and utterly devoid of the warmth one might expect from a grieving widow. They were cold, flat mirrors reflecting only the damp landscape outside. "Mr. Finch from Richmond," she stated, not as a question, but as a known fact. Her voice was low, measured, and without the slightest tremor of emotion. "Mrs. Thorne, my deepest condolences. I appreciate you taking the time to see me." She simply gestured him in, the house interior a claustrophobic museum of Victorian severity. Dark wood, heavy drapes, and the lingering, sweet, stale scent of lilies from the funeral. "The police were thorough," Evelyn said, leading him to a small, airless study. "A fall. Silas was clumsy, distracted. End of the story." "The simplicity of the conclusion doesn't quite fit the man, does it, Mrs. Thorne?" Arthur countered, setting his satchel on the desk. "Reverend Thorne was a respected man. Did he have any troubles? Financial, doctrinal, or perhaps personal?" Evelyn turned, her grey eyes finally focusing on him with an unnerving intensity. He had a church full of souls to save in a valley that fought him every day. That was his only trouble, Mr. Finch. The spiritual corrosion of Blackwood Hollow. "And what about the talk? The macabre curse mentioned in the papers?" A flicker, the briefest shadow, crossed her expression. "Gossip. The mountain folk cling to superstitions, Mr. Finch. They've always believed the chapel is tainted by the old mining accident 50 years ago, bodies lost in the ground beneath the foundations. Silas tried to stamp out that talk. It made him unpopular in certain circles. Unpopular enough for an accident to be helped along." She took a slow, deliberate step closer. "Silas was not pushed. He did not slip. Something took him, and I am certain it was something he sought out." The shift in her narrative was startling. Arthur leaned forward. "Sought out? What are you suggesting?" Evelyn walked to the window, staring out at the stone chapel where her husband met his end. The rain seemed to make the granite walls weep. For the last 6 months, Silas was obsessed with the chapel's basement. Not the small damp storage area the police examined. Something deeper, the original construction plans. He believed there was a sub-level, a hidden cavity beneath the altar, and he was convinced it held the proof that the curse was not superstition, but a terrible earthly truth. Something specific a family in this town did generations ago. Arthur felt a genuine chill that had nothing to do with the weather. And what truth is that? He never told me. He would only speak of a debt that needed to be paid, and a constant growing sound coming from the stone floor during his late-night services. A rhythmic, faint thudding, like a heart beating in the rock. Her voice was still monotone, but the words held a terrifying gravity. He went down to find the source, Mr. Finch, and he never came back. She turned back from the window, her gaze fixed on Arthur, a desperate, silent plea in her eyes that finally broke through her composed exterior. I want you to finish what he started. Go down into the darkness he found. Find out what killed my husband, and why it is not the fault of the mountain, but the fault of a man, or a family, in this valley. Her silence then became the heaviest thing in the room. The mystery, far from being solved, had just begun to coil. The minister's widow was not just grieving, she was an accomplice to a deeper truth, and her detached manner was a mask for a terrifying secret motive. Before you go, make sure you don't miss a single detail of this investigation. Hit the subscribe button and the bell notification so you are the first to know when the next chapter of The Minister's Widow 1910 drops. You won't want to be left in the dark. Arthur Finch left the parsonage, the conversation with Evelyn Thorne leaving him colder than the mountain air. Her calculated composure was unsettling, yet her revelation about the deeper basement and the rhythmic sound was too specific to be dismissed as mere delusion. He spent the twilight hours reviewing old town records in the sparsely furnished, dusty office of the Blackwood Hollow sheriff. A tired man named Deputy Vance, who had clearly hoped the Thorne case was closed. The town's history was bleak. Founded on a small failed coal mining operation in the mid-19th century, Blackwood Hollow had never truly recovered when the mine closed in 1860, following a catastrophic tunnel collapse. Several families, mostly impoverished laborers, had lost relatives. The Blue Ridge Community Chapel, Arthur discovered, was built on the very land above the sealed main shaft entrance in 1870. The local gossip about bodies beneath the foundation suddenly carried a heavier weight. Armed with a faded, brittle copy of the chapel's original blueprints, which Deputy Vance reluctantly admitted Silas Thorne had requested weeks prior, Arthur returned to the chapel grounds near midnight. The fog had thickened, muffling the already scarce sounds of the valley. The stone building was a black silhouette against the weak moon. The Reverend's fall was reported to have occurred on the external concrete steps leading to the main storage basement. The steps were mossy and treacherous, but the blueprint marked a second internal access point. Sub-level storage, dual foundation access, indicated near the altar in the main sanctuary, accessible only by a reinforced utility trapdoor, likely covered by a rug or a removable section of the floorboards. Arthur let himself in through a side door, using the key Evelyn had silently pressed into his palm before he left, a gesture both complicit and unnerving. The sanctuary was vast and silent, dominated by the raised pulpit and the massive wooden altar. The air was heavy, smelling of old varnish and the pervasive dampness of the mountain. He moved toward the altar, his leather shoes squeaking faintly on the polished wood. He ran his hands along the thick runner carpet. Beneath it, a seam. Kneeling, Arthur found the recessed iron handle, cleverly disguised within the wood grain of a floor section, about 3 feet square. It was secured by a heavy brass latch. He tugged. The latch was stiff, but after a moment of effort, it gave way with a dry, scraping sound that seemed deafening in the silence. He lifted the section of floor. Below him was not a basement, but a vertical, cylindrical shaft. A narrow, brick-lined well, descending into profound darkness. A heavy iron ladder was bolted to the side, disappearing into the void. The air rising from it was significantly colder and carried a distinct mineral odor, a smell of wet earth and old metal. Arthur retrieved a thick glass and brass lantern from his satchel, lit the wick, and carefully lowered it into the shaft. The light cut through the gloom, revealing the brickwork was damp, slick with condensation. He could see the bottom, a small, circular earthen floor, perhaps 10 feet down, with a single dark, low doorway, an archway of unworked stone, leading horizontally away. This was not storage, This was a sealed-off access point, almost certainly related to the abandoned mine. He carefully began his descent, the rungs cold and unforgiving under his gloves. The sound of his descent was hollow, metallic, and close. As his feet touched the earthen floor, he extinguished the lantern momentarily to test the air for any sign of bad circulation or gas, a necessary precaution near old mine shafts. The air was stable, but heavy, pressing against his lungs. Once the lantern was relit, Arthur stepped through the low stone archway. He found himself in a narrow, rough-hewn tunnel, clearly not part of the church's main foundation. The ceiling was low, forcing him to crouch. This was a remnant of the coal mine, a short exploratory passage driven decades ago. Water seeped down the walls, and the earthen floor was muddy. He held the lantern high. After about 50 feet, the passage opened slightly into a small, naturally formed cavern. It was dry here. The walls were lined with shelving made of rough-cut timber, supporting an array of objects. This was Silas Thorne's secret study. There were stacks of documents, all brittle and yellowed, old church financial records, land deeds, and, most disturbingly, a collection of newspaper clippings detailing the 1860 mine collapse, with handwritten annotations in the Reverend's tight, precise script. The notes fixated on 3 specific families who had been forced to sign away their land claims cheaply shortly after the disaster. The names were circled: the Hendersons, the Crowleys, and the Marlowes, all prominent, long-standing families in Blackwood Hollow today. Arthur picked up a heavy, leather-bound ledger lying open on a makeshift table. It was Silas Thorne's final journal. The ink was fresh, the last entry made just hours before his death. Arthur read, the words rushing at him with the chilling urgency of a man descending into madness or profound revelation. The sound is undeniable now. Not a rhythm, but a mechanism. It is underneath the main altar, precisely where the blueprints show the original support pillar for the shaft entrance. It is faint, metallic, and deliberate. They say the ground is cursed. They are wrong. The ground is silent. It is the people who created the silence. I have pieced together the land acquisitions, the forced sales after the disaster. The men buried down there, they didn't die from a cave-in, they were sealed in. The tunnel was blocked from the outside to ensure the coal rights reverted cheaply. 3 families were ruined, their claims worthless, their men entombed, and 3 others gained control. The founders, the men whose names grace the memorial plaques. It was a calculated murder, covered by the earth and the passage of time. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. Murder. Not a curse, but a conspiracy of greed and silence carried across 50 years. He continued reading the final entry, his heart hammering against his ribs. I have the final piece. The ledger detailing the payments made to the mine foreman who set the charge. It is secured in the iron strongbox beneath the eastern shelf. I will present this truth to the town council tomorrow. I will not allow their damned hypocrisy to stand on the graves of their victims. I am going back up now. I must ensure the strongbox is secured, then I must leave this dreadful place and make preparations. I hear it now. Louder. The metallic grind. Wait. The door. It is closing. No, I am trapped. The air is going stale. Who has the other key? Evelyn. No, she wouldn't. The sound is directly above me now, not grinding, shuffling. Someone is moving the stones. They know I have the ledger. They've come to silence the debt. The entry ended in a frantic, illegible scratch of ink trailing off the page. Arthur looked beneath the eastern shelf. There was no strongbox. The murderer had taken the evidence. He quickly scanned the cavern. On the ground, partially obscured by a stack of old hymnals, he saw something small and dark. A heavy, ornate button made of jet, the kind of button found on a gentleman's tailored coat. It did not belong in a dusty cavern. It was a crucial physical clue left by the person who sealed the door and, presumably, ensured the Reverend's accidental fall. Arthur pocketed the button. He had to assume the murderer knew he was coming, knew he would find the tunnel, and had already removed the ledger. He scrambled back to the ladder, his mind racing. Silas Thorne wasn't killed by a fall. He was sealed below, panicked, and either forced to take a desperate fatal exit through the upper basement or killed when he tried to climb back up to escape the person waiting. As Arthur reached the top of the shaft and replaced the heavy trapdoor, he realized the terrifying implication of the Reverend's final words. The murderer had to have an intimate connection to the chapel and the parsonage, someone with access to the blueprints, the trapdoor key, and an understanding of Silas's obsession. He slipped out of the chapel just as the first weak grey light of dawn began to touch the eastern peaks. The minister's widow, Evelyn Thorne, had sent him to the very place where her husband discovered a 50-year-old conspiracy and met his end. Was she the grieving widow seeking justice, or the architect of a final terrible silence? Arthur had to find the iron strongbox and identify the owner of the jet button. The conspiracy went far deeper than he had imagined, twisting through the town's oldest and most respected families. He was no longer investigating an accident. He was hunting a murderer deeply embedded in the Hollow's suffocating society. The next morning, the mist over Blackwood Hollow had given way to a weak, watery sun, but the psychological atmosphere remained heavy. Arthur's objective was clear: the jet button and the three names, Henderson, Crowley, and Marlowe. He decided to leverage his role as an investigator, seeking to finalize the Reverend's affairs. He first visited the local tailor, a nervous elderly man named Mr. Abernathy, whose shop smelled strongly of mothballs and steamed wool. Arthur presented the jet button. "A fine piece, sir," Abernathy mumbled, turning it over with shaky fingers. "Jet and solid brass shank. Not local work, no. This is Richmond, or possibly Philadelphia quality. Bespoke tailoring, and heavy wool. Look at the thread remnants. Only one man in this hollow orders coats like this." "Who?" Arthur asked, his voice low. "Judge Sterling Marlowe," Abernathy whispered, glancing nervously at the street. "The judge still orders his winter coats from his city tailor. This is off his best coat. Lost it, did he? Judge Marlowe, one of the three circled names from the Reverend's journal and the town's highest legal authority." The plot thickened immediately. Arthur proceeded to the town council building, a stately but aging brick structure. He requested a formal meeting with the judge, ostensibly to discuss the insurance implications of the Reverend's final week of life and the disposition of some church property. Judge Marlowe was a man in his late 60s, impeccably dressed, with a silver mane and the air of someone accustomed to absolute respect. His office was cluttered with legal tomes and smelled of pipe smoke. "Mr. Finch, a dreary business this," the judge began, his voice gravelly and authoritative. "Silas was zealous. Burnt himself out, I suppose. The steps were treacherous. We'd discussed having them repaired." Arthur took a seat, placing his satchel on the floor. "Indeed. We are looking for any papers that might indicate outstanding church debts or any uncollected funds. For example, any ledgers that the Reverend may have kept privately regarding long-term, family-specific contributions to the church fund." Marlowe's eyes narrowed slightly, a barely perceptible tightening around his mouth. "Reverend Thorne handled the accounts with utmost transparency, Mr. Finch. No private ledgers. You must be mistaken. Perhaps a personal journal, then? He seems to have been quite preoccupied in the weeks before his death, researching the town's history, specifically the 1860 mine collapse." The judge leaned back, lighting his pipe. He did not look at Arthur. "A morbid hobby. Yes, he spoke of it. Trying to put those old superstitions to rest once and for all. Foolish." It only stirred the pot. "Did he ever mention finding the final piece of evidence regarding the land sales after the disaster? Something that suggested the collapse was not an accident?" Marlowe drew slowly on his pipe. A thin line of smoke curled up, obscuring his face for a moment. "Absolute nonsense, Finch. That tragedy was thoroughly investigated by state authorities at the time. Idle speculation from a man whose mind was clearly failing him." Arthur decided to press the point, watching the judge's hands, which were now gripping the armrests of his chair. "Mrs. Thorne mentioned the Reverend believed the accident was a cover-up for a conspiracy of murder involving three prominent families who benefited from the ensuing land grab. The Hendersons, the Crowleys, and the Marlowes. The judge's face remained granite-like, but his composure fractured. He slammed his pipe down on the desk. "Get out, Finch. You have overstepped your bounds. This is malicious slander against the founding families of this community. I demand you cease this insane line of inquiry immediately, or I will have Deputy Vance escort you out of Blackwood Hollow." Arthur stood slowly, maintaining eye contact. "I understand, Judge, but I have found evidence that suggests the person responsible for the Reverend's death had access to the church's deepest secrets and owned a tailored coat. He did not mention the button. I will not stop until I find the ledger that the Reverend sought and the person who sealed him in that underground passage." Arthur left the office, the judge's furious, strangled demand to return those papers echoing down the hallway. Next, Arthur drove his rented automobile out to the sprawling farm of the Crowley family. Marcus Crowley, a thick-set man in his 50s, was a key figure in the town's small, successful logging operation. Arthur found him supervising a team of workers. When Arthur introduced himself and brought up the 1860 mine collapse and Reverend Thorne's research, Crowley became immediately defensive, his face flushing crimson under the brim of his hat. That damn preacher, always sticking his nose where it didn't belong, filled the heads of the poor folk with rubbish about curses and old wrongs. It was an accident, pure bad luck. Crowley spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "Did he ever come to you about the land deeds, Mr. Crowley? The quick sale of the properties to your family, the Marlowes and the Hendersons? The land was sold fair and square, desperate times. You city boys don't understand how things work in the mountains. We took a risk and it paid off. Thorne was trying to shake us down, for God's sake. Said he needed reparations for the church fund, or he'd start digging up old records. Did he find what he was looking for?" Crowley looked away, wiping his mouth with the back of a calloused hand. "He said he found a document, something about the foreman's final report. He was going to take it to the state capitol. We told him to drop it." "We being the three families," Crowley glowered. "Get off my land, Finch. You're asking for trouble you don't want." Arthur left, confirming two things. The three families were indeed operating in concert, and they knew the Reverend had found the evidence, the ledger. His next visit was to the Henderson family. He found old Mr. Henderson, a reclusive, frail man, sitting alone on the veranda of his modest house near the river. The house looked neglected. Henderson, unlike the other two, was surprisingly contrite. His hands trembled as he spoke. "It wasn't right, what we did," the old man confessed, his voice a dry rasp. "My father always regretted it. The pressure from Marlowe and Crowley's fathers was immense. They said if we didn't play along they'd ruin us all. The deed was signed. They sealed the tunnel after the minor cave-in, claiming the air was toxic, but it wasn't. They just wanted the land." "Did Reverend Thorne confront you about this recently?" "Yes. He was holding a book, a ledger. Said he had the proof, the actual order and the payment to the foreman. He was a righteous man, Mr. Finch. Said he was going to expose it all." The old man suddenly grasped Arthur's arm, his eyes wide with fear. "He told me he would present the evidence to the council tomorrow, but if anything happened to him, I had to tell you where he was keeping the strong box." "Where?" Arthur asked urgently. "He said the box was too dangerous to keep in the church. He hid it in the old town hall records archive, under the floorboards of the main reading table, secured by a hidden lock. He was planning to retrieve it on the morning of his death." This was the break Arthur needed. The ledger was not taken by the killer that night. It had been moved before the Reverend was trapped. The killer must have sealed the trapdoor, believing the ledger was still in the cave, only to realize their mistake later, which explains why the killer then went back for the strongbox. But where did the Reverend go after securing the box? And why did he return to the chapel that night? Arthur thanked the trembling old man and headed straight for the old town hall. Marlowe and Crowley were clearly working to suppress the truth, but they were acting in response to the ledger, not the death. The true killer had to be someone whose motivation went beyond protecting the 50-year-old conspiracy. Someone who realized the ledger had been moved and intercepted the Reverend when he returned to the chapel. The deeper mystery was no longer what the Reverend found, but who realized the crucial strongbox was missing from the cave and acted with deadly, surgical precision. The old town hall was a forgotten building, serving now only as a storage facility for decades of official documents. It was located on the edge of the town, far from the council building, dusty and desolate. Arthur gained access using a skeleton key provided by Deputy Vance, claiming he needed to review tax assessments on the parsonage property. The main reading room was high-ceilinged and cavernous, filled with rows of metal shelves packed with bound volumes. A single large, heavy oak table dominated the center of the room. Arthur ran his hand along the base of the table, feeling for a seam or a lock. The Reverend had been meticulous. It took Arthur nearly 20 minutes, tracing every inch of the underside, before his fingers brushed against a tiny, almost invisible lever release beneath the central pedestal. He pressed it. With a low, wooden groan, a narrow compartment slid open from the pedestal's side. Inside lay a small, black, heavy iron strongbox. It was locked. Arthur felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the proof. He tried the keys from his own satchel, keys to various safes and locks he had accumulated over the years, but none fit the small, complex lock. He needed to find the key or a way to force the box open without damaging the contents. He searched the surrounding area, focusing on the floorboards, the nearest shelves, and the table's surface. Nothing. The Reverend would have kept the key in a place only he would trust. Arthur paused, stepping back to consider the Reverend's movements. Silas Thorne had hidden the box here before going back to the chapel on the night of his death. Why return? To retrieve the box, or to use the hidden tunnel for another purpose? Suddenly, a realization struck him. Evelyn Thorne, the widow. She had given him the chapel key, but had she given him all the keys? Arthur remembered the Reverend's journal entry. I'm going back up now. I must ensure the strongbox is secured, then I must leave this dreadful place and make preparations. The ledger was secured. The Reverend's actions suggested he was planning to escape and go public. He must have returned to the chapel not to retrieve the box, but to gather some personal effects from the parsonage before fleeing, and that meant passing by Evelyn. Arthur quickly drove back to the parsonage. The door was locked, but the chapel key still worked on the side entrance. He re-entered the house, calling out, "Mrs. Thorne, I need to ask you about the Reverend's keys." Silence. The house was empty. He went directly to the Reverend's study, focusing on the small, unassuming mahogany desk. He systematically checked every drawer, every book, and every loose sheet of paper. In the bottom right drawer, tucked beneath a stack of sermon notes, he found a small silver key on a tarnished chain. It was unlike any house key. It had the ornate, heavy head of a safe or strongbox key. Arthur pocketed it and headed back to the town hall. He had a tight window before Marlowe or Crowley realized his true purpose and moved against him. Back at the archive, his hands were trembling slightly as he inserted the silver key into the strongbox lock. It turned with a satisfying click. He lifted the heavy lid. Inside, resting atop several folded, brittle documents, was a heavy, aged ledger, its cover embossed with the initials B. H.M. Co., Blackwood Hollow Mining Company. Arthur carefully removed the ledger and opened it to a specific bookmarked page. It was a disbursement log, dated late 1860. The entry was clear, precise, and damning. The official ledger confirming the murder for profit committed by the ancestors of the three families. The proof of a crime 50 years in the making. Arthur quickly photographed the page and the surrounding documents with his camera, taking multiple clear plates. The other documents included the original land transfer papers, confirming the low sales prices the widows of the entombed miners were forced to accept. Just as he finished and was about to close the box, he heard a sound. The distant, faint but unmistakable clack of a latch. Someone had entered the archive. Arthur froze, his heart pounding. He quickly slid the ledger and papers back into the strongbox, locked it, and replaced it in its hidden compartment, covering the lever. He grabbed his satchel and lantern, extinguishing the light. He was alone in the vast, dark archive. He could hear soft footsteps moving through the metal aisles, deliberate, measured, coming closer. He pressed himself against the spine of a tall shelving unit, trying to blend into the shadows. He heard the footsteps stop near the front of the room. A match struck, and a small beam of light, a thin electric torch, not a lantern, cut through the dark. The beam swept the center of the room, illuminating the heavy reading table. The footsteps moved around the table, closer. Arthur recognized the faint, earthy scent of the person. Marcus Crowley, the logging man. He must have been observing Arthur's movements, or perhaps Judge Marlowe had alerted him after their confrontation. Crowley stopped at the reading table and began to examine the side panel, clearly looking for the access point. He moved slowly, methodically. Suddenly, Crowley swore under his breath, a low, guttural sound. He had found the lever. He slid the compartment open. Arthur knew he had only a few seconds. If Crowley found the box, he would open it and know Arthur had been there. He had to draw attention away from the compartment. Arthur took a deep breath and deliberately knocked over a stack of empty archival boxes near the back of the room. The crash was deafening in the silence. Crowley instantly snapped his head up, the torch beam darting toward the noise. "Who's there? Show yourself, you damned sneak!" Crowley started moving rapidly toward the back of the room, his heavy boots thudding on the wood floor. Arthur used the moment of distraction. He quickly slipped out from behind the shelves, moving silently toward the entrance. Just as he reached the main door, he glanced back. Crowley's torch beam was searching the aisles, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. Arthur slipped out, locking the door silently behind him and scrambling back to his car. He looked back one last time. Crowley was now trapped inside the archive, and Arthur had the physical evidence, the photographic plates, and the knowledge of who was involved in the conspiracy. But a terrifying question remained. If the three families only wanted to suppress the ledger, why did Reverend Thorne die after moving it? And who owned the jet button and sealed the access door, indicating a more intimate personal act of murder? The conspiracy was exposed, but the killer was still free, and now hunting him. Arthur had to return to the parsonage one last time, to find the truth hidden behind the widow's silent grief. Arthur parked his car a safe distance from the parsonage and approached on foot. The sky had darkened again, pressing down on the isolated town. He had the ledger, the photographic evidence, and the names of the conspirators, Judge Marlowe and Marcus Crowley, who were now aware of his presence and his goal. But the central mystery, the identity of the person who sealed the Reverend in the tunnel and then forced him to his fatal fall, was still connected to the jet button. Arthur checked the button again. Bespoke. Expensive. Judge Marlowe was a strong candidate, but Arthur had a growing, chilling feeling about the widow, Evelyn Thorne. Her unnatural calm, the specific way she steered him toward the secret tunnel, and her claim that Silas sought out his end. He slipped back into the parsonage. This time, he went to Evelyn's private chambers, the large bedroom overlooking the chapel. The room was meticulously ordered, cold and impersonal. It was the room of a woman who felt no emotional attachment to her surroundings. He began searching her wardrobe and drawers. He found no bespoke men's coat, no key to the strongbox which was with him, and no diary. Then he noticed a stack of heavy bound volumes tucked away beneath a pile of linen in a chest. Engineering textbooks. Not theology, not poetry, but specialized works on archival architecture and early 20th century locking mechanisms. This was highly unusual for the wife of a rural preacher in 1910. He pulled them out, his hands moving faster now. Tucked into one of the books, The Art of Sealing and Securing Vaults, was a handwritten note in a precise looping script. A distinctly feminine hand. It was a note from Silas to Evelyn. "Evelyn, my love, you have a mind for mechanisms and stone that far exceeds mine. Can you decipher this old chapel blueprint? I am certain that utility access is more than storage. I need to know the locking specifications. If the old mechanism is still in place, it will be the most secure place to conceal the strongbox once I retrieve it from the town hall." The note was a revelation, Evelyn was not just an acquaintance of the Reverend's research, she was his partner in the technical aspects. She was the one who could interpret the blueprints and identify the key to the trapdoor and the strongbox. Arthur moved back to the main study. He opened the Reverend's desk drawer again and examined the remaining keys on the chain he had found. There were 2 smaller keys, likely for cabinet locks, and 1 very heavy, old iron key, completely separate from the rest. It was a key of unusual size and weight. He immediately returned to the chapel. The air in the sanctuary was even colder than before. He went straight to the altar and knelt, studying the trapdoor latch. It was the heavy brass latch he had struggled with before. But above it, hidden within the wood grain, was a small secondary keyhole, a heavy, rotating tumbler lock that provided the true security. Arthur inserted the heavy iron key he had found in the Reverend's study. It turned smoothly with a dull clunk. This lock had been engaged when the Reverend was down there. The trapdoor could not be lifted with the simple brass latch alone. The Reverend had been deliberately locked in. He returned to the parsonage, this time with certainty and dread. He found Evelyn in the kitchen, calmly preparing a pot of tea. The very picture of domestic tragedy. "Mrs. Thorne," Arthur began, his voice flat, "I have retrieved the ledger. The evidence against Marlowe and Crowley is conclusive. They sealed the mine tunnel for profit 50 years ago. Your husband was right." Evelyn stopped stirring the tea, her back to him. "Then justice is served. You can leave Blackwood Hollow now, Mr. Finch. I have the strongbox key. I will deal with the authorities." "You knew about the sub-level and the key, Mrs. Thorne. You advised the Reverend on the locking mechanism of the utility access shaft," Arthur pressed. "And you knew he had secured the ledger in the town hall." She slowly turned, her eyes still those flat, emotionless mirrors. "He shared his research with me. I was his wife, his partner. A preacher's wife needs more than just hymns to occupy her mind, Mr. Finch. And a preacher's wife also knew the Reverend would return to the chapel that night. Not for the strongbox, but for the personal effects he planned to take before fleeing." Arthur continued, his voice rising in intensity. "He went down into that tunnel one last time, perhaps to replace the trapdoor key in the sub-level hiding place, and you were waiting. You sealed the secondary lock. You trapped him." Her composure was beginning to crack. A faint tremor ran through her jaw. "Why, Mrs. Thorne? The conspiracy was the father's crime, not the son's. Why kill your own husband when he was about to expose a 50-year-old murder?" Evelyn set the spoon down, the soft clink echoing in the tense silence. "Because he was going to destroy everything. Not the 3 families, Mr. Finch. Us." She walked toward him, her expression a mix of venom and controlled despair. Silas Thorne was not the righteous man everyone believed. He was a fraud. A pompous, self-serving man who cared more for the idea of a grand exposé than the suffering of the people. He didn't find the ledger to seek justice. He found it to blackmail the 3 families. Arthur stared, aghast. Blackmail? Yes. He went to Marlowe and Crowley first. He demanded a massive private donation to the church, to his private fund, in exchange for his silence and the destruction of the ledger. They refused. They were going to have him discredited instead. But the journal says he planned to expose them. The last entry was written in panic, Mr. Finch, when he realized they were coming for him. Silas was a coward. He found the key to the deep lock and the strongbox because he was going to take the blackmail money, disappear, and let the church collapse in his absence. Evelyn's voice was now a low, furious hiss. He was leaving me behind, with nothing, ruined by his failure and greed. Arthur finally understood the coldness, the motivation. It wasn't about the ancient conspiracy. It was about the immediate, personal betrayal. "You sealed the tunnel." He panicked. He tried to climb up the outside steps to the upper basement in a desperate attempt to escape. "But you were waiting," Arthur pressed, his mind racing to complete the horrifying picture. "You had to make sure he was silenced before he could confess the blackmail plot, before he could tell someone you had the key to the strongbox. Evelyn's gray eyes filled with a terrifying, vacant resignation. He fell, a desperate man in the dark, on treacherous steps. An accident? No. You followed him. And you took the jet button, didn't you, Mrs. Thorne? When you sealed the door, you must have seen a struggle, or you realized someone else was involved. Arthur had to find the definitive proof, the final twist. Evelyn's composure crumbled fully. She raised her hand to her throat, a faint dark smear on her cuff. I found him at the bottom, Finch. He was dead. I didn't push him, but I did secure the other thing. She pointed to the fireplace mantel. Sitting unobtrusively next to a ceramic vase was a small, beautifully carved wooden box, not more than 6 inches long. What is that? Arthur asked, suspicion replacing dread. The key, the very one he took to lock the deep access. He planned to leave me with nothing, but he left me with the mechanism for his silence. Arthur reached for the wooden box. The mystery of the 3 families was the backdrop. The true terror was the slow, chilling evolution of a desperate woman into a calculating killer. Arthur opened the small wooden box. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was not a key, but a small, heavy piece of metal tubing about 3 inches long, threaded on both ends. It was a pressure valve or a gas line connector. It meant nothing to him. What is this, Mrs. Thorne? It is not the key to the strongbox, Mr. Finch. It is the key to the deeper truth, the one that killed him before the fall. Evelyn looked utterly spent, the weight of her secret finally breaking her. Silas was not just trapped down there. She continued, her voice weak. When he went down, he wasn't alone. He was meeting someone he trusted, who had promised to help him with his escape. Arthur felt a sickening jolt. The jet button. It wasn't Marlowe. It wasn't Crowley. Who was it? The Reverend had been confiding in Deputy Vance for weeks. Evelyn whispered. Vance grew up here. His grandfather was one of the entombed miners. Vance knew about the conspiracy and the ledger, but he also knew Silas was a blackmailer. He told Silas he would help him disappear in exchange for the ledger, which Vance intended to use to expose the 3 families legitimately. Arthur remembered the nervous, tired sheriff who had so easily handed over the chapel blueprints. Vance had been close to the Reverend, gaining his trust. Silas didn't trust Vance completely, Evelyn explained. He only agreed to meet in the sub-level, their secret study, to hand over a copy of the ledger, not the original. But he did promise to show Vance the strongbox key, which Silas kept in his wallet. Arthur realized the final crucial detail. The strongbox key was found in the desk, meaning Silas had removed it from his wallet before going down to the tunnel. He intended to deceive Vance. Vance was expecting the strongbox key, Arthur surmised, piecing it together. When he realized Silas was going to cheat him, he panicked. He didn't want the blackmail money. He wanted justice for his family. Evelyn nodded slowly, tears finally welling in her vacant eyes. Vance didn't seal the trap door. Vance had a better way. Silas had told him about the gas line. Arthur looked back at the small metal tubing in the box. What gas line? The original mine infrastructure. The main shaft was ventilated using a low-pressure gas line that ran right past the altar's foundations. It was sealed off 50 years ago, but Silas, with his obsessive research, found a way to partially reactivate it, intending to use it as a threat against the families. Evelyn gestured to the metal tube. This is the connector valve. Silas left the gas line slightly open in the sub-level as a precaution. Vance, realizing Silas was lying, grabbed the Reverend's wallet, took this valve connector from it, and ran up, securing the main trapdoor latch, not the key lock. He then went out to the old exterior access point, the steps. And that's where the jet button came from, Arthur finished. A struggle outside near the steps as Vance ran. No, Evelyn corrected, her voice barely audible. The button is from Vance's coat. It came off in the tunnel. Vance realized he'd been seen by a third person. The third person? The person Silas was really afraid of. Judge Marlowe. Marlowe had been watching the parsonage, suspecting the blackmail. Marlowe saw Vance meet Silas and then run out of the chapel. Marlowe followed him. They struggled on the exterior steps. Vance shoved the judge and Marlowe fell, but he grabbed the Reverend's wallet from Vance's hand during the struggle. Evelyn drew a shaky breath. Vance's panic was complete. He thought the judge had been killed and the ledger key was lost. He fled into the woods. "And where does the Reverend fit into all this?" Arthur demanded. Silas was trapped down there. The gas line was leaking slightly, but not enough to kill him. He began to feel the effects of the low oxygen and the slow, accumulating gas. He tried to get out through the upper basement steps. He thought the gas would kill him before the judge found him. He died on the stairs, trying to escape the slow suffocation. The truth was a multi-layered disaster, a 50-year-old conspiracy, a blackmail plot, a struggle for the evidence, and a death by gas and panic. Evelyn had simply found the body, saw the wallet gone, and seized the moment to complete her final silence, locking the deep access with the key she already possessed to solidify the accident narrative and protect herself from any possible association with Silas's blackmail. Arthur placed the ledger, the photographic plates, and the jet button on the table. He picked up the gas connector valve. "We need to find Deputy Vance," Arthur said. "He has the ledger key, but he also possesses the truth about the judge's involvement in the struggle on the steps. And the judge has the Reverend's wallet with the final piece of evidence." Evelyn reached for the phone. "I will call Vance. I know where he is hiding. You need to confront Judge Marlowe and get the wallet." Arthur didn't trust her, but he needed the wallet. "If you try to warn anyone, Mrs. Thorne, you will be implicated in the cover-up of the gas line murder. You will be held responsible for the final sealing." Evelyn simply nodded, her face blank. "I am already responsible, Mr. Finch. I am simply trying to clean up my husband's mess." Arthur left her with the telephone receiver in her hand, heading back into the deepening shadow of Blackwood Hollow. The climax was approaching. Arthur drove his automobile directly to Judge Marlowe's large, imposing residence on the hill overlooking the town. It was late afternoon, and the air was heavy with the smell of an impending thunderstorm, mirroring the tension in Arthur's chest. He found Judge Marlowe in his study, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, staring moodily out the window. The judge looked defeated, his silver hair disheveled, his posture slumped. The confrontation with Arthur, combined with the discovery that Silas Thorne had the ledger, had clearly broken his facade. Arthur did not mince words. He walked in and placed the strongbox and the ledger on the judge's desk. "This is the ledger, Judge. It confirms the murder of the miners in 1860, sealed by the authorization of your father and his partners. The blackmail attempt by Reverend Thorne is also now clear." Marlowe sighed, a long, weary exhalation. "I knew it was coming. 50 years of silence. And now this." He took a slow sip of his drink. "Crowley and I agreed that Thorne was a dangerous menace. We were going to meet with him the next morning and offer him a substantial sum to disappear. We did not want him dead. But you were there, Judge," Arthur stated, his eyes locked on Marlowe's. "You followed the Reverend to the chapel, suspecting the blackmail. You saw Deputy Vance meet him and you saw Vance run out. You struggled with Vance on the basement steps, and in the struggle you took the Reverend's wallet. I have the jet button from Vance's coat." Marlowe looked down at the ledger, avoiding Arthur's gaze. "I found Silas's body on the steps, already dead. I saw the wallet protruding from Vance's jacket and took it. I admit that. I wanted to see what proof Silas had on me. I wanted to protect my family's legacy. I didn't push him. I didn't kill him." "Did you open the wallet?" Marlowe nodded. "Only a few dollars and a small folded piece of paper. No ledger key. I realized the strongbox must have been hidden elsewhere." "And the paper, Judge?" Marlowe slowly reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a small, worn piece of paper, the corner torn and damp. He placed it on the desk. It was a hastily scribbled final note from Reverend Thorne, addressed to Evelyn. "Evelyn, I am returning to the chapel. The blackmail attempt failed. They are on to me. I need the key to the sublevel and the key to the gas line valve. I am running, and I will be waiting at the Blue Ridge Gap train station at midnight. Bring the keys and the money I secured. Silas." Arthur snatched the note. This was the final devastating piece of the puzzle. It completely exonerated the judge from the murder charge and revealed the final lethal intent. The gas line valve key, Arthur murmured, looking at the connector in his hand. He needed it to seal the gas line in the tunnel so he could safely wait for Evelyn to help him escape. He knew he was breathing in the gas, but the person who found him, Mrs. Thorne, had already hidden the key. She left him to die. The widow? Marlowe asked, astonished. Why would she do that? Because the money he secured wasn't theirs, Judge. It was yours. Arthur pointed to the ledger. Silas found the ledger. He knew the blackmail would fail, so he robbed the church collection plate for his escape money. Evelyn, seeing her whole life crumble, chose silence over exposure. Just then, the telephone on the judge's desk rang shrilly. Marlowe, shaken, answered it. His eyes widened as he listened. Yes, Deputy, he's here. What? The widow called you? Where are you now? Marlowe's face went pale. No, Deputy, don't go there. It's a trap. He has the evidence and she knows it. Marlowe slammed the phone down. Evelyn called Deputy Vance. She told him to meet her at the old mine shaft entrance, the real one, the one that collapsed. She told him she had the ledger key and the strongbox. She is leading him into a final trap, Arthur. She's going to silence the last witness who saw the judge and Silas struggle. Arthur felt a visceral dread. Evelyn Thorne was cleaning up the entire mess, eliminating the last loose end. Vance was the only one who could confirm the judge's innocence in the murder and expose the final, self-serving act of Silas Thorne. We have to get to the shaft. Now, Arthur commanded, grabbing the ledger and the strongbox. As they ran out to the car, the heavens opened and the promised storm broke in a torrent of rain, washing over the town and setting the stage for the final, desperate confrontation. This is where the darkest secrets of Blackwood Hollow come to light. The suspense is real. Don't let the mystery end here. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell now. You absolutely cannot afford to miss the final 3 chapters of The Minister's Widow, 1910. The drive to the old mineshaft entrance was treacherous. The unpaved mountain roads had turned to slick, flowing mud in the sudden torrential rain. Arthur drove his automobile recklessly, the headlights cutting weak cones through the downpour. Judge Marlowe, pale and gripping the dashboard, gave frantic directions. The entrance was located several miles outside the town, in a remote, heavily wooded section of the mountainside, the original main tunnel that had collapsed in 1860 and was supposedly sealed. When they arrived, the scene was chaotic. The mine entrance was marked by a deep, wooded declivity in the hillside, where an old, crumbling stone structure served as a memorial. A single, dark Ford, Deputy Vance's vehicle, was parked haphazardly near the entrance, its engine still idling. "Vance is here," Marlowe shouted over the roar of the rain. Arthur and Marlowe scrambled out of the car. The rain was heavy, soaking them instantly. They saw no sign of Evelyn or the deputy. Arthur ran to the mine entrance structure. It was a partially collapsed stone archway leading down into a dark, unstable shaft entrance. The ground around it, saturated by the rain, was already becoming unstable. "Deputy Vance!" Arthur shouted, the sound swallowed by the storm. A faint, muffled voice drifted up from the darkness. "Finch? Is that you? She's down here. She led me down and then the tunnel collapsed. I can't move. My leg is pinned." Arthur peered into the darkness. He could see a beam of a torch lying on the muddy ground, its light angled upward. Below, the deputy was clearly trapped beneath a heavy timber beam that had given way from the structure. "Where is Evelyn Thorne?" Arthur demanded. "She's gone. She used the instability of the rain. She loosened the support beam and then fled. She said she was ending it all. She's going to expose the whole damn thing and let the town ruin itself." Vance cried out, his voice hoarse with pain and panic. "The strongbox, Vance. Did she take the strongbox?" "No, I saw the strongbox. It's in a small recess just past the beam. She intended to blow the whole entrance to make it look like an accident. For the 3rd time. She has the dynamite." Arthur and Marlowe looked at each other, the reality of the widow's final, desperate act sinking in. Evelyn Thorne had realized that the truth, the ledger, The blackmail, her own actions, would destroy her. She was sacrificing herself and Vance to bury the entire Blackwood Hollow scandal under a mountain of earth and to ensure the three families were finally ruined. "We have to get him out," Arthur said, stripping off his saturated jacket. He handed the strongbox and the ledger to Marlowe. "Keep these safe, Judge. This is the only proof that can exonerate you and expose the widow." Marlowe, despite his age and panic, nodded firmly. "I'll stand guard. Hurry, Finch. The ground is shifting." Arthur carefully descended into the mud and debris. The air was heavy, with the smell of wet earth and ancient wood. He reached the deputy, whose leg was badly pinned beneath a massive old cross-support beam. "It's no good, Finch," Vance groaned, his face slick with sweat and rain. "It's too heavy, and I can smell it. Dynamite." Arthur scanned the small, unstable cavern. Tucked into a dry recess, he saw the glint of black iron, the strongbox, and next to it, several sticks of thick, wax-paper-wrapped dynamite with a short, green-tipped fuse sticking out. The fuse was not yet lit. Evelyn meant for the rain and the collapse to do the job, Arthur observed grimly. "But we need to get you out before the ground gives way again." The beam was immense. Arthur tried heaving it, but it wouldn't budge. He searched the debris frantically for a lever. He found an old, rusted iron pry bar, half buried in the mud. "On the count of 3, Vance, I need you to pull hard, no matter the pain. 1, 2, 3. Arthur jammed the pry bar under the beam, using all his weight to lift it an inch. Vance screamed, a wrenching sound of pain, but managed to pull his leg free, a dark stain immediately spreading on his trousers. "We need to go." Arthur hauled Vance up onto his shoulder, but as he turned, he saw her, Evelyn Thorne. She was standing silently in the narrow tunnel connecting the entrance to the cavern. She was holding a small, old-fashioned matchbox. Her black dress was caked in mud, and her face was terrifyingly resolute, her grey eyes reflecting the dark of the tunnel. "You won't leave Blackwood Hollow, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice unnaturally calm over the sound of the rain. "The town must be cleansed of this rot. The dead should remain buried, and the living must be punished for their hypocrisy." She moved toward the dynamite recess. Arthur dropped Vance and shouted, "Mrs. Thorne, stop. This will kill you and the deputy. The town needs the truth, not another disaster." "The truth is a lie, Mr. Finch," Evelyn said, her voice echoing strangely in the small space. "The truth is that Silas was a fraud, that Vance was a vengeful fool, and that the 3 families are murderers. My truth is that I am the only one capable of ending this 50 years of contamination." She reached the recess. The sticks of dynamite lay ready. Arthur acted on instinct, forgetting his suit, his reputation, and his fear. He lunged toward her, knowing he had to stop her before the match was struck. Evelyn, expecting him, whirled around. She didn't fight. Instead, she threw a handful of wet, muddy earth directly into Arthur's eyes, momentarily blinding him. He staggered back, wiping his eyes frantically. He could hear her movements. "Judge!" Arthur yelled, still blinded. "The box! Get her to the box!" Marlowe's voice was strained, high-pitched from the entrance. "I can't see, Finch. The rain." Arthur cleared his vision, just as Evelyn was bending over the dynamite. She had opened the matchbox. "You should have left Blackwood Hollow when you had the chance, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice a final, mournful farewell. Arthur saw his chance. He wasn't close enough to tackle her, and he had no weapon, but he had the knowledge of her true purpose. "The money, Evelyn," he shouted, projecting his voice with all his might. "Silas's escape money. You didn't do this for the town or the miners. You did it because Silas stole the money and you wanted it back." Evelyn froze, the match poised a hair's breadth from the abrasive strip. Her expression changed, the resolute mask cracking to reveal pure, agonizing avarice. "He said he had secured enough for both of us. He was supposed to take me away from this dreary place." She wailed, the despair finally surfacing. "He told me the money was in the strongbox." "It wasn't, Evelyn," Arthur pressed, taking a slow step toward her. "The strongbox only holds the ledger. The money, the church's offering fund that Silas robbed, is still in the parsonage. He lied to you, even in his final moments. He never meant to share it. The shock was total. Evelyn's hand holding the matchbox trembled violently. Her whole world, built on righteous vengeance and personal gain, had just collapsed. She hadn't even opened the strongbox, believing the money she desperately sought was inside. In that critical instant of paralyzing realization, Deputy Vance, lying on the ground, used the last of his strength. He stretched out his hand and swept the heavy pry bar, which Arthur had used to free him across the ground. The bar caught Evelyn's feet. She cried out as she lost her balance, stumbling forward. The matchbox flew from her hand, skittering across the mud. Her head struck the hard stone wall of the recess with a sickening thud. Evelyn Thorne went limp, collapsing face down beside the unlit dynamite, instantly silent. Arthur rushed forward, pulling her away from the explosives, checking her pulse. She was unconscious but breathing, a terrible bloody wound visible on the side of her temple. The macabre curse of Blackwood Hollow had finally claimed its architect. Marlowe, hearing the sudden silence and the cry, scrambled down into the shaft. He helped Arthur secure Vance and the unconscious Evelyn. "The explosives?" Marlowe asked, his breath ragged. Arthur pointed to the matchbox lying 20 feet away. "She was stopped. It's over, Judge." They worked quickly, pulling Vance and Evelyn up and out of the unstable mine entrance. Back on the surface, the rain began to subside, leaving a world washed clean, though not unscarred. The silence, after the storm and the terror, was profound. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds over Blackwood Hollow for the first time in days, casting a sharp, clean light on the town's hidden rot. Arthur Finch sat in Deputy Vance's office, reviewing the final details. Evelyn Thorne was under guard at the local infirmary, facing multiple charges. Deputy Vance was at the hospital, his leg broken but stable. Judge Marlowe was outside, nervously waiting. Arthur had the strongbox, the ledger, the photographic plates, and Silas Thorne's final note. The official story, as it would be presented to the state prosecutor, was complex but grounded entirely in human failing. 1. The conspiracy of 1860, confirmed by the ledger. The ancestors of Marlowe, Crowley, and Henderson sealed the mine, causing the death of several miners for profit. The current generation tried to cover it up, leading to their confrontation with the Reverend. 2. The blackmail attempt, confirmed by Silas's note and Evelyn's confession. Silas Thorne, a corrupt man, attempted to blackmail the families. 3. The death of Reverend Thorne, a multi-layered failure. Deputy Vance, seeking justice for his family, attempted to steal the ledger key, causing a struggle with Silas and sealing the main trapdoor latch. Silas, fearing being trapped with the leaking gas line, which he himself had installed, and realizing he was breathing low oxygen, panicked and climbed the treacherous exterior steps to escape, where he fell and broke his neck. Evelyn Thorne, realizing Silas had double-crossed her on the escape money, found him dead, secured the final key lock on the deep access, and then called the police to solidify the accident narrative and protect herself from the blackmail scandal. 4. The final act. Evelyn Thorne's desperate attempt to bury the entire truth, including the involvement of Vance and Marlowe in the final hours under the collapsed mine shaft, was stopped. Arthur opened the strongbox one last time, looking at the ledger. The paper was dry and the evidence conclusive. Judge Marlowe entered the office, his expression a mixture of relief and devastation. "The strongbox. What do we do with the evidence, Arthur?" Arthur placed the ledger back inside the box. "The truth about the 1860 murder must come out, Judge. The families of those entombed miners deserve justice and reparations. The blackmail is a tragedy, but the crime of the fathers cannot be ignored. It will ruin us," Marlowe said weakly. "No, Judge. It will finally clean Blackwood Hollow. You have a chance to redeem your family name. You can cooperate, confess the cover-up, and organize the reparations based on the value of the land seized. That is the only way to end this curse, by bringing 50 years of truth to light." Marlowe looked at the ledger, then at Arthur. After a long moment of contemplation, he nodded, a heavy weight lifting from his shoulders. "I will do it. I'll call my lawyer. And Crowley, we will face the music." Arthur felt a sense of finality. He had come to the mountains to solve a simple accident claim, and he had uncovered a sprawling saga of greed, blackmail, and intimate personal murder, all without a single ghost or magic talisman. The true terror was always the human heart. He packed his satchel, leaving the strongbox and the evidence securely locked in the deputy's safe. The rain had washed away the blood and the mud, but the scars on Blackwood Hollow would remain. As he drove out of the valley, passing the Blue Ridge Community Chapel one last time, he noticed a small gathering of people near the entrance. They weren't gossiping or mourning. They were reading the proclamation posted on the door, a copy of the official police report. The truth had finally arrived. Arthur Finch left the mountains, not as an insurance investigator, but as a reluctant architect of a painful but necessary reckoning. The macabre echo through the Blue Ridge Church was silenced, replaced by the sound of a community finally forced to confront its own dark history. He had solved the case and helped expose a massive systemic injustice, all because a minister's widow had tried, in her own desperate, twisted way, to find justice for herself.